Welcome back, Chris, to the World XP podcast. You are now a published author. It's about we had you on 3 times when you were supposed to be published like a week later, and that didn't happen. But life happens, and so here you are. If you don't know who Chris is, go back and watch the other ones that he was on, because it's very sciencey. We don't have time to hash all that out currently. Well, we could if we wanted to, but we'd be here for a while. So
yeah, nobody wants to hear that.
Welcome back. Good to have you.
Thank you. No, it's my pleasure. I'm excited to be back. Am I the most returned guest?
I think you are. If you count the group ones, yes. Jason has been on 3 times, I think, by himself. But this is your 4th time on the show, but twice you were with Katie and Tom as well. So, no.
However, it's only a fractional appearance then on the group.
Yeah. However you want to, we can say you're tied. However you want to stick the feather in your cap, I'm good with that.
Cool. Yeah. So I'm back. I have finally published the book. I have a copy of it here. There it is. It is What the Heck is a Clinical Trial and Where Do I Find One? It's published on Amazon. You can find it just by searching the title or by searching my name, Chris Nirschl.
Or clicking the link in the description.
Or clicking the link. Yeah, so it's great. So like you said, I've been working on this book for a long time. And it feels like it's been almost close to done for the better part of a year or more. But it finally came to fruition, a couple of recuts. And yeah, now it's pretty short. It's not a super long book. It's a book written for patients, with the idea that for people who find themselves getting a cancer diagnosis, things kind of get emotional and a little bit like a whirlwind pretty quick, right? So the way this story typically goes is you go into the doctor, you feel a little off, you have some pain somewhere, something just seems a little off, or maybe you're kind of a little bit older and you're getting one of your normal screenings done, and you get called into your doctor's office and they say, hey, bad news. We're concerned you have cancer and we're going to do a biopsy and confirm it. Or we know up front, you have cancer. And then what happens is they typically, there's a set series of treatments that people walk through, which are called lines of therapy. So it's, kind of akin to hockey, right? Like you've got first line, second line, third line, but you're just cycling through the things that are approved treatments. And for a lot of patients, that'll result in, in either in cancer going into remission or, in the age of immunotherapy, you might get some long-term survivors who we tentatively use the word cured around. But a lot of patients will then progress, right? And they'll eventually run out of therapies, and then they don't know what to do, right? Your doctor has been acting as your guide the whole time, and they're, appropriately holding your hand and saying, okay, this is what we're doing now. This is what we're going to do next. And that's all well documented and kind of fits in sort of a well-oiled machine as you're getting through the script of what you're supposed to do. But when you get to the end of the script, things get a little wild. So your doctor a lot of times won't, what treatment you get next will depend on a lot of things that aren't directly related to medicine, right? So it'll depend on who your doctor is, where they're located, how into research they are or aren't. It'll depend, it'll go down to the stage of it'll depend who they had lunch with last week, right? Because they had lunch with a friend who's running this clinical trial. And then, you show up in their office and they say, hey, Eric, this is great. I know we just got past your last line of therapy, but I just had a lunch with Dr. Malone. He's got this great therapy. We're going to get you on this trial. You're good to go. Right. Mm-hmm. And you're in a scenario where, you just walked into your doctor's office and they said, Eric, you have cancer. Nothing worked, but I got another plan. Right. It's in some way, it's not intentional on the doctor's part, but it's sort of pressure sales 101. Right. Yeah. Eric, I had your car in the lot, but it's not here now. But what I've got for you is this other car.
Yeah.
Right. And so then patients end up on a trial. And again, it's the same thing, right? Your doctor's holding your hand. They're saying, listen, I'm going to send in my nurse. They're going to bring in the forms. We're going to go through the consent. your mind is reeling because you're still trying to figure out which way's up at this point.
Yeah, of course.
They're going to ask you if you have any questions. You won't have any questions because you're not sure what
You haven't sifted through the information yet. Yeah.
Yeah. And then at the end of the day, you're going to get kind of a packet that's going to say, hey, do you want to be on this trial? It's going to document a lot of stuff about the biology.
Mhm.
And you're probably going to take it. That's what's going to happen. It's not to say that there's something wrong with that approach, but I think from a patient perspective, there's a lot of things patients would do well to understand about clinical trials and what they are and what they aren't, and how you can kind of figure out what you're signing up for. And then actually it turns out there's a database that you can search, right? So you don't have to just take your doctor's advice. You can just flip on your computer and in 10 minutes, see every clinical trial that's recruiting patients within 60 miles of you. And you can just send them an email and join that trial instead, or get some information or a second opinion or, So that was really the driving force behind this book, was just putting that information together so people know what they're walking into.
Sure. That makes sense. I think, I know when we talked before, when we've talked just generally throughout life, when we're talking about this subject in particular, is difficult because even if you can go through what a clinical trial is, you're kind of, once you get to that point where all the normal therapies have not worked, you're kind of stuck anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, do you want to die or do you want to try this thing? It's like, yeah, I'd rather not die, so I'll try this thing. But then if you want to do some research in it and you go to that website, for instance, like you see another clinical trial for, like, you don't know, I feel like it's difficult to hash out, okay, this drug says it'll do this and this treatment says it'll do that. They both say they'll help with this cancer, but I don't know, like for example, using physical therapy as an example, like you want to use ice or heat, like they both could work,
right?
But like for me, I know which one would work better in that particular situation because I've got like that level of experience. People don't have cancer the same amount of that they have sprained ankles. So like,
right.
How do you, does the book go into that, or is it just more just like, this is how the trials work and this is what the terminology means and this is what, because I feel like that would be a whole nother set of things to go through.
Yes. So it does, but it goes at it from more of a systems perspective than a biology perspective. So the rationale, so when I've been asked in the past to search for clinical trials for patients, right? So I'm not a medical doctor. Typical disclaimer, none of this should be considered medical advice. You should consult with your doctor. But when I'm asked to look, patients come up with questions like that, right? So they say, hey, I found this thing about, there's a trial about a cancer vaccine and adoptive cell therapy where they're putting T cells back in, and there's chemotherapy mixed with a small molecule inhibitor. Which one should I take, right? And the answer is, I don't know, right? And the trouble is that people assume that somebody does know, right? They know which one's going to work. And I think that's the wrong way to think about this, right? So I think people's gut instinct is to try and figure out which therapy they should go after, right? Do I want an mRNA? Do I want, do I want something else? Do I want radiation? Do I want chemotherapy? Do I want them both? Do I want them mixed? Do I want them in a certain order? That kind of thing. And I think that's the wrong way for most patients to think about it, because the reality is, if you're not a medical person, right? I mean, this book's written for people who aren't in the medical space and find themselves sort of forced into it. If you're not a medical person, you're never going to be able to catch up in time, right? You're never going to be able to catch up on an MD level, intimate knowledge of the different therapies. You just can't be that, right? It's not a reflection on you. I mean, I can't do, when my car breaks down, the odds that I can become a full-fledged mechanic in the next 3 hours is effectively zero, right? It's just not going to happen.
I love that you said effectively zero. Such a statistician.
You just hedge your bets, right? That way you don't get burned. But So then the question is, if you're a patient, right, how should you think about this? If you're not gonna be able to pick the right therapy out of the hat, I think there's two truths that patients should understand, right? So the first truth is that your doctor can't pick it out either, right? And that is going to sound like a slight to doctors, and there are a lot of doctors who will disagree with me on that, and that's well and good, and you should hear them out. But this is the point I would posit to people who are thinking about this. The average clinical trial in the United States, right, costs something like $20 million a pop, right? And to get through FDA approval, you've got to get 3 of them. On top of the fact that you're going to spend just ungodly amounts of money on these things, right? I mean, you're going to get up into the hundreds of millions of dollars in the development of this. So the problem is, when you look at sort of the development of drugs, you take, if you're a company, right? So if we assume that a company's goal is to make a drug that works and to make a whole bunch of money, right? That's kind of the goal. It would behoove you to be able to pick out of a hat which drugs are going to work and which ones you're wasting hundreds of millions of dollars on, right? I mean, if you could just pick the ones that work. And so along those lines, you pay a bunch of really smart people, right? You find every medical professional you can, you go to Stanford, you go to Harvard, you bring in these scientific advisory boards, you do everything you can to get as much advisory information on board while you're making your decisions. And with all that, the amount of money that could be made, that if you could do this reliably, correctly, how often do you think a drug gets approved, right? So if you're from the first trial to FDA approval, what % make it all the way through with all of those experts on board and all the money on the line?
I know you mentioned this in a prior episode, and I don't remember the number, but I know it's stupid low.
Yeah, it's 3%.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, it's worse than guessing. 50% would be guessing, right? It's 3%. And so, again, the point of that's not to say like there's no way to get at this, but to say that even the smartest people that people can come up with who could make bajillion dollars by being able to do this reliably can't do it reliably. Full-time people cannot do this reliably. And the issue is it's a little bit in the weeds, but it comes down to the fact that no amount of mouse work or monkey work or any other species can replicate humans. We're just not there yet. So at some point, you have to try it, right? You just have to try it.
Yeah.
And so that's what it comes down to, right? So a clinical trial is an experiment. And if we knew how it was going to turn out, then you wouldn't have to do the experiment. And so with that in mind, like realizing that nobody can pick the right answer out of a hat, the real question is then, can you bend the odds in your favor, right? And so the example I use in the book is I say, if you're going down to the track, right? Let's say we're going to go for like a bachelor party, we're going to go bet on some horse races, right?
Sure.
And I tell you, Eric, if you can pick the right horse out of these 30 horses, you'll win $1 million, right? And then I say, also, I'm just going to pitch this idea to you. There's this other race over here. There's only 3 horses in the second race. And if you get the right one, you get $1 million. Which race do you bet on?
Obviously, the second one.
Right. You bet on the second one, right? Because you've got a 30% chance. And so this is what I point out to patients in the book, is that if you're in a phase 1 trial, that's the first step of the process, you've got a 3% chance, right? 1 out of 30 that you're going to hit something that even becomes a therapy. If you're in a phase 3 trial, you're in a 1 in 3 chance. It's 30% of those eventually get approved. So just knowing that there's a difference between a phase 1 and a phase 3, you can get 10 times the bang for your buck. Yeah. Right. If you can, you want to be in a phase 3 trial. But like we said, that's not part of the discussion in the normal clinical setting. It's just hey, again, my buddy is doing this thing. Do you want to be in on it? It's this therapy. We're doing antibody blockade. We're going to block the checkpoints on your T cells, and then you're going to get an immune response. And we see these really good responses in the blood. Do you want in? And you're like, you never know. Like, nobody knows to ask what type of trial, what phase is it? How many patients are there going to be? Is it blinded? There's a lot of terms that people don't understand that would affect, I think, their decision making if they knew.
Yeah. That's a lot. I want to unpack a little bit of what you talked about. The first thing is, So I'm going to go in order of most succinct answer. Well, and and then we'll go down the rabbit hole, probably the last one. You were talking about, so the first thing is, you mentioned blind clinical trials. We've heard that a lot in the news recently with, say the big eye horse drug thing that if I say it will get us kicked us off YouTube. The second thing is mention that you would argue that sometimes doctors don't know what's the best one. And then the third one is regarding the cost of clinical trials and that sort of thing. So the first one, when you say blind clinical trial, for those listening, what does that mean?
Sure. So blinding is effectively what it means is that you may not know which drug you got, right? So blinding, it's an anti-bias measure that clinical trials introduce. And the idea is if your doctor doesn't know if you got the treatment, the experimental treatment, or in this case, typically the standard of care treatment, so sort of a general catch-all like a radiation or chemotherapy. So if they don't know which one they're giving you, they can't bias the reporting of the results. And so what they do is they'll send doctors vials and it just says, this is simplified, but the vial just says A. The drug is A. You're going to give it to your patient and you're going to tell us if it works or not, right? And we're going to send a bunch of vials to a bunch of different doctors at a bunch of different sites. Nobody knows if they're administering the real drug or the placebo / standard of care. And by doing that, they prevent people from kind of putting their finger on the scale, like, well, I gave the experimental drug and I think my patients are doing better. And so that's what blinding means, right? So it means, a lot of recently in the news, it's been a lot about sort of vaccine trials. And in vaccine trials, you're given a jab in the arm and they don't tell you if it was a vaccine or nothing. And then they just see what happens to you, right? And they don't tell you and they don't know.
Fun.
Yeah, so that's part of it. But the reason it's built in, right, is to prevent bias, right? So if you really believe in this technology, right, like giving people the benefit of the doubt. If you really believe this technology is going to work and you got the experimental drug, it might modify your behavior a little bit. And then over the course of thousands of people, it starts to look like this thing works when it doesn't really work.
Yeah. For the CEO of Pfizer was on Lex Friedman's podcast. And for those of you who don't know who Lex Friedman is, I highly recommend you go look him up. But he mentioned that for they're developing a pill for COVID. I think it's called Merck or something like that. Or wait, is Merck the other company? I don't know.
Merck's the other company, but yeah.
Oh, well, they're Pfizer developing a pill for COVID, and he mentioned that. So they're doing this blind clinical trial, and he's like, there's only 2 people in the world that know who got what, like which doctors got what, and they have like separate like passwords or code keys to get into the database, and they need to use them both together to get in. So it's like super, super secure. So before we jump onto those other 2 things, is that fairly common practice, or is that more secure due to the nature of the situation? The reason I asked that, because if one guy gets hit by a bus, then are they ever going to get that data again? Not that I'm sure they have ways to do that, but is that standard to be that secure for something, for a blind clinical trial like that?
Yeah, it is. And it's a mixture of wanting to trust your data, right? So like if you're a pharmaceutical company, you don't want to be tricked into thinking this thing is working when it's not, because then it won't sell, right? Like eventually people will catch on, and then that's bad blowback, right? And also, I mean, again, that's the cynical read on it. I think a lot of, as a member of the pharmaceutical industry, I want to help people. I don't really want to trick myself into thinking I was helping people.
Sure.
But the other thing is, so this gets back to our earlier discussion. So it is common in later phase trials. But it's not common in phase 1s. So these are the kind of things that people don't understand about what they're signing up for, right? So you, as again, using you as an example, if I were to sign you up for a phase 3 trial, and in cancer, a placebo is not typical anymore. So in vaccines, it's typical that you'll just get saline or you'll get the vaccine, and they'll be like, well, go see if you get the disease or not. But in cancer, that's considered unethical, right? Because it's sort of leaving people untreated. And so typically what they'll do in cancer is you'll get, like I said, standard of care or something called the physician's choice. So it'll be your doctor won't be blinded, but you will. And so your doctor will get to choose a therapy. So and they just won't tell you that you're getting chemo and not the experimental drug or something like that. But yeah, so that's typically common in the later stages. But in an early stage, like a phase 1, you're typically not blinded. You're told up front what you're getting. And they are going after, the reason that they can do that is they're going after something different, right? So this is the other part of thing that people don't understand, is that a phase 1 trial is not even really trying to determine whether the drug works or not. That's not really the goal.
Or just determining whether or not it's going to kill you, which is
pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense why it's not blind then from that perspective. You'd want to know if you might die or get or have diarrhea for 3 weeks or whatever other crazy side effects that makes you do. That makes sense. That makes sense. The second thing was doctors not really knowing what would be best. And for me, I think that comes down to people who don't know want to trust somebody that knows. And then when the person that you're supposed to trust also doesn't know, then that's a little bit worrisome. I find myself doing that with like physical therapists occasionally if I get injured and it's not getting better. And I'm like, why is it not getting better? And they're like, well, I don't really know, to be honest. It's like, well, you're supposed to know. You went to school. But also everybody's different and they can't know the exact the exact things. And so I think for that it comes down to, it's not really a question, just thought I had when you were talking about that. But I don't know, like for you don't really have, we've talked about this a lot. When I would text you like, hey, what should I do about this or this? You'd be like, I don't know, dude. It's like you don't have a problem really saying that. And I feel like that's good. I wish more people in positions of authority would just say that they don't know, because for me, like we've seen this a lot the last couple of years, people don't want to say that they don't know, and then when it's found out that they said one thing and it wasn't that thing, then people get upset. And so for me, if like it's, I don't know, that's just a personal sort of not pet peeve, I don't know, preference, maybe observation, one of those things, I don't know.
Yeah, and again, this isn't to totally slam on doctors, right?
Of course,
I think
of course.
They know. I mean, if you're the cancer patient, then having your doctor say, I don't know, is kind of devastating too.
Yeah, that's horrible.
But it sounds like they're saying like, well, this was fun. Good luck.
Yeah. And I totally understand why they don't want to say, I don't know. Like when you're treating the patient, that's, you want to do everything like you can to save them. So it's like, you don't want to sound like you're giving up, because I feel like that would be more troublesome. But just a general sort of statement.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I think they do, they're busy people, right? I mean, I don't know every clinical trial. So I live in Boston, right? I don't know any medical professional who would tell me that they know of every clinical trial occurring in Boston right now. Yeah, it's impossible, right? Like nobody could know that.
Too many patients, too many this, too many that, paperwork, all sorts of stuff that's going on, which I don't know. So like it kind of, whose responsibility, before we go to the other one, whose response is it? It's both, I guess, the patient and doctor responsibility a little bit to kind of know, like as a patient, you got to take care of yourself, but also as the doctor, you should probably know some stuff, relevant clinical trials going on. Like obviously if you're a cancer doctor, you're not going to know clinical trial for like diabetes or whatever. But so it's kind of both a little bit, I would think. Is that sort of how it usually plays out in practice?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think you're right that it's a little bit of both. I think they're the patients and the doctors are kind of working on opposite ends of the spectrum. So part of the goal of this book was to kind of help get those two in synergy, right? So the doctor, like you said, has a bunch of expertise and really not much time to spend on kind of your particular issue, right? And so they lend their expertise and come up with a solution. In reverse, you have tons of time, right? But not much expertise. And so I think the optimal way this relationship works is that you as the patient will bring options to your doctor and ask for input. right? So you could come back with a list and say, listen, I came up with this list of 5 clinical trials. 2 of them are phase 3, 1 of them is a phase 2, 3 of them are phase 1. What do you think? Right? As opposed to, like I said, the normal version, which is like, well, let's just check what's in our hospital, because our hospital has lots of clinical trials, and they do. But when you're in a scenario where the ideal situation for a patient is to land in, I would argue that for any individual patient, they are better off in any phase 3 than any phase 2 than any phase 1, right? It's sort of immaterial what they're testing from a odds of success ratio. And so, like I said, if there's not a phase 3 trial at your hospital, but there is one on the other side of town, you just wouldn't know about it. It's not, it's not in your, kind of your circle. So I think that's the kind of thing that a patient could really benefit from saying, hey, look, I found this thing, instead of going to this hospital on the east side of town, I just have to go to the west side. But it's a phase 3, I was thinking about it. What do you think?
Yeah, that makes sense. The last point I want to make, and I'm Googling this example real quick because it's when we had talked before, I was always of the sort of mindset that, well, sometimes the big pharma needs to have these prices because of like innovation and clinical trials cost a lot and all those sorts of things. But then I was looking for, just basically doing, I'll say research, but it wasn't really research.
Sure.
I was just listening to podcasts and this and that from people who are medical professionals. And in 2009, I think Pfizer settled for, I forgot what the drug was for, but basically the drug like didn't work and they fudged the data and this and that, and they paid a settlement of like, I want to say like some in the single digit billions, but they made double digit billions off it. And so for me, when not that I've ever particularly trusted that sort of big pharma type deal.
Sure.
But when people throw out the like, they need to have this price differential for innovation purposes, that kind of like, for example, when the Pfizer CEO was talking to Lex, I was kind of like, yeah, that used to make sense to me. But after digging some more, obviously I don't know the books of these companies and whatever, but that seems not very, I would say that seems like a convenient excuse to have things be expensive. And so I know, like you just mentioned, a phase 1 clinical trial would cost about like $20 million, which is a ton. But when you produce a drug that doesn't work, like you said, and you still come out like $5 billion in profit, like that doesn't really hold water, not the cost of the clinical trial, but their reasoning that they need to charge more because of innovation. It's like that doesn't hold water with me anymore. So I guess kind of putting you on the hot seat a little bit with this, but what is sort of what are your thoughts on the whole subject? Because I know that was your opinion, or that is or was your opinion when we talked in episode 1, or episode 1 of this sort of you, basically. Not episode 1 of the whole podcast, obviously, but that was your opinion then. Have you given sort of, I don't know if you listened to that podcast, or given sort of some of the recent events that, I mean, you being in the industry, I don't really know. I feel like my question is kind of out there.
No, it's fair. I mean, it's a good question. I think, so I think in the realistic answer is it's a mixture of a couple things, right? So, I mean, as we noted, clinical trials are really expensive.
Sure.
And most of the time they flop, right? Sure. So the 97% of clinical trials that don't get approved, they're just part of the world's most expensive junk heap, right? I mean, they're a complete loss of anything. So the 3% that do succeed have to pay for the 97% that don't. But I think it'd be naive to also say there's not an aspect of doing whatever the market will bear, right? And so in some cases you have an audience that, or a market that, I mean, for better or for worse, sort of has to take it, right? I mean, what are they going to do? It's that or kick the bucket. Okay,
Yeah.
then I'll make it work. I also think we've introduced a very strange wrinkle into the system with insurance companies,
Mhm.
Paying out, sort of ludicrous amounts of some things and then not paying out to other things and modifying whatever healthcare decision you can make. Like, I think the pricing that leads to bubbles, right? Like the moment you sort of separate the consumer from the producer, I think bubbles start to form, right? Like, because
Sure.
there's weird discrepancies in the pricing that develop.
Mhm. Yeah.
I think it's akin in some ways to the to college pricing, right? Like
Mhm.
once you separate the student from the tuition, and just be able to just put the student on the hook, right? Like, it's then, oh yeah,
Yeah.
whatever you need, it's that price. So like,
FAFSA and all that other stuff.
yeah, and so it does, and that has repercussions in like our hospital systems, right? I mean, a lot of them run shoestring budgets, right? It's something we've kind of not just ironically not discussed in the last 2 years, which is that most ICUs are, at 90% capacity a large percent of the time. Like,
Mhm.
that's, it's not profitable to have empty beds. So they run a tight ship. And so when you hit a scenario where you have a surge, you try to build in things to accommodate that, but you weren't running with a large surplus before. And then if you go to the hospital, right, there's this fun exercise where you ask them for a line by line breakdown.
Mhm.
And they don't even really know what the pricing is, right? Like, you kind of ask and you're like, hey, what's that cost? They're like, I don't know, we got to talk to your insurance. Nobody knows until
Yeah.
it's all said and done. And so I think it's both, right? I think, pharmaceutical companies do, they do have to make a profit, otherwise they won't exist. I mean,
Of course.
in my space, I'm in the venture capital, I'm in a small biotech, right? If we can't get investors, our drugs don't get invented.
Yeah, I guess the question was not really posed at the smaller ones, but more the giant ones.
Yeah.
And moving sort of more into the philosophical or more abstract, I guess. At
Mhm.
what is because I've thought a lot about this issue, because you have systems in Europe where you pay extra taxes and the government takes care of all of that, but then sometimes you run into efficiency problems and other times not, and sometimes people exaggerate those efficiency problems, and like, I have no way of really knowing,
Mhm.
because it depends on where you look and who you ask, and everyone will tell you something different. So like,
Mhm.
you ask somebody who lives in Britain that had one bad experience with waiting for forever for some treatment, but then you go to the
Mhm.
next guy and it's like, oh, I got it next week and it was fine. It was like, it depends. Like, there's no, this goes back to like the I don't know thing. So I
Mhm.
feel like there's not really one right way of doing it. And so that
Mhm.
leads to people that have a very, I'll say, intimate knowledge of how it works, right? These people on the Pfizer boards that then go into the
Mhm.
FDA and then they swap roles, and then it's like they're all just
Sure.
the same people that are just in this like merry-go-round of profit.
Mhm. Yep.
It's like, I can't think of a tenable solution, which is really troublesome to me, because I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I like to have sort of ideas on. I don't need solutions all the time, but like,
Mhm.
this would seem to work, but I can't think of something that would even seem to work, because there's every solution that I think of that's either been implemented before or has been talked about. I can point to like, that'll be a problem, that'll be a problem, that'll be a
Mhm.
problem, and that will also be a huge problem in all of them.
Yeah.
So I don't,
Sure.
what like, in your, because you're in it, what sorts of, and obviously don't have to throw anybody under the bus, but like, philosophically speaking, what sort of is
Mhm.
like, where is there ways to help the consumer whilst also encouraging innovation and allowing these companies to remain in like a free market? Like, what sort of
Yeah.
things, where are we, and where do we go from here a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's tough. I mean, I do think you're right. I think whenever somebody pitches like, I have the solution, that's usually a good sign that they don't have the solution. Um, but I think it's complicated, and it's complicated by the fact that these are dynamic systems that are in constant flux.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I mean, um, I'm going to botch this quote. There's a great Thomas Sowell quote about it's something like, there's not choices, there's only trade-offs.
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what we're dealing with here, right? So, if you want a highly efficient healthcare system that handles patient needs and responsiveness, I think you're going to have some profit motive in there, but probably not as much as exists today, right? I think that's probably, you could get, you don't have to you can find really good mechanics and plumbers and other things that don't require excessive amounts of bureaucracy that drive up costs to just function. But on the flip side, I think that system where you cut a bunch of profit out is also not very innovative. It's not risk taking. You're trying to balance these things,
Yeah.
and in any given situation, you're going to need to lean one way or the other to correct.
Sure.
So I'm with you. I don't know what the answer is. I would point to the fact that a large amount, the majority, I think it's the overwhelming amount of majority of biotechnology research occurs in the United States, right? It's where biotech companies function and develop, and I think a lot of the world benefits from that, right? So an experiment that works here, a drug gets developed, it eventually comes off patent. There's a generic form, and it's sold around the world for it's $3 a pill, and they charge you $5 a pill, right? But the backstory of that was a matter of innovation and development and invention that needed more of this dynamic, in times wasteful process, right? Like that has, like I said, this 97% failure rate.
Right.
And I think too, I mean, I will say one thing is that by the pricing being so high, there is a large incentive to get better than that 3%, right? Like I mean, it kind of comes back to what we said at the beginning, is if I could pick the winners at a better than 1 out of 30 rate, right? I mean, not only do I benefit, I become, easily the richest person on the planet in several years. I mean, Elon and Jeff Bezos wouldn't have like diddly squat on me if I could do that.
You'd be up in space every day.
Right. But also on some levels, the consumers, benefit, right? Because all of a sudden I'm sitting here going, yeah, do that, don't do that. And a bunch of drugs come to market faster, right? So that's a long way of saying I don't know.
Yeah, no, of
but
course.
that it's a dynamic thing.
We're in agreement. I think for me, it's just like, surely we can do better, I guess, basically. Like everyone can look at what's going on with the insurance companies and everything else and be like, this is not set up in an optimal way for people to exist.
Well, and I think a lot of it is also sort of a slow creeping development, right? Like I think a lot of with the insurance situation and medicine has been a slow creep of like increasing rules and increasing paperwork and increasing bureaucracy that is always sort of pitched as we're trying to protect patients. And I think, in their heart of hearts, they are trying to protect patients, but as it builds, it never goes, nobody ever goes, hey, that rule didn't really work. Like we probably shouldn't have them file that form anymore. Right.
Yeah,
but like all of that takes
stays.
time and it just stays forever. And it always builds in one direction. So, and I understand, people would say, I think the steelman argument would be is if you start stripping away things, people are going to get hurt.
Yeah, no, of course, which is why it's tough, because when you talk to the individuals that are in there, they're like, they have good intentions usually. And the same with the doctors, and the same with even like the researchers at the pharmaceutical companies. And even if you listen to the Pfizer CEO, like you can not believe him. He says he has good intentions, but if we're going to take him at his word, they all have good intentions, but they're all in this, like, as the saying goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And so it's difficult because you can't point, there's not one person or one thing that you can point to be like, okay, we'll just we'll get rid of that.
Right.
And then it'll be all better.
Right.
And so that makes it difficult as well when everyone can recognize there's a problem. But there's not, it's like, nope, not that. Like that seems to be working kind of okay. Maybe that could be fixed a little bit, and then you kind of do research into why that thing is that way, and then you find out it is that way because somebody else in this other agency has this other rule that you have to follow for this and that, and then you go figure out, well, why do they have this? And then you go back to because somebody didn't follow the rule and a bunch of people died, and you had like the Tuskegee experiment and all these horrible things that happened. So there's all, it's like this never ending cycle of stuff. And
well,
it's
and I
really
think
hard to unwind it.
Yeah, and I think too, I think sometimes we engage in sort of these proxy intellectual wars, right? So we're going to pretend like what we're fighting about is healthcare, but what we're really fighting about is sort of a deeper question. So, you know, if I pitch the question to you this way, right, it's more of the like, it's the trolley problem, right?
Of
so
course.
do you want a system that saves 97% of people, you know, who have low grade issues, but the 3% who have serious issues, they're toast, right? They don't have a shot. Or do you want a system that can cover that 3%, right? So it has all the innovation and development to come up with these treatments for maybe a minority patient population, but it also means that it's expensive for everybody, right? So it's like that 97% is going to pay, and they're not going to get the best service because that's not where our focus are. And that's more of a philosophy question than a medical question.
And it doesn't come out in practice, because in practice, that's an impossible question to answer, because you'd like the best of both worlds, but that doesn't really happen in that way.
Right.
And I think in Europe, it's easier for those sorts of countries to go with the 97% because it's a smaller, more homogeneous population who kind of all try to look after each other and that sort of thing. And then in the US, it's just such a boiling, well, to use the boiling pot, right?
Yeah.
But it's just a clusterfuck of people, basically. And so like people are selfish generally, and human nature is not the best thing in the world. And so that's why you can't really have the best of both worlds, because if everyone was motivated by the right things, we wouldn't be in this problem. But, you know, here we are. So
yeah. But yeah, you make do with what you can, I guess.
Yeah. So it's tough. And I would kind of, I don't even know. It's like, it's hard to even think about it. Is kind of like, not depressing, but you kind of just run into this wall where you're like, well, I don't know anymore. I don't really know what to do, but here we are.
Yeah.
And that's tough from a perspective of, if you're just a regular person that wants to go vote for a party, like a candidate or whatever, who feels a certain way about healthcare, they like to go through this thought exercise and then to also end up in the same place where you're like, well, neither of them know either. You're kind of just like, you throw your hands up, and then it's super difficult. So I don't know.
Well, I mean, part of this too, but I mean, like you said, I mean, part of that feeling was one of the drives for me writing this book.
Sure.
Right?
I was about to say that it's helpful to get the information out there. So when people are like, oh, I don't know, you've kind of helped with one, not to diminish what you've done, but one super tiny aspect of this whole convoluted whirlwind of shit, and you've basically helped people translate it into English.
Yeah.
Or, well, I don't know if you're translating it into Spanish or whatever as well. I mean, who knows? But anyways,
depends if Amazon will help me.
To normal people talk.
Yeah. Well, and it's like you said, I mean, there's an aspect of this that's inside baseball, right? And, you know, it benefits patients to understand, right? And to know what they're signing up for. And you know, for some patients here, the book's, I mean, truth be told, the book's not going to help them, right? They're in a scenario where they're not going to qualify for a lot of these clinical trials. You know, and so for those patients, they might find themselves in a situation where their only option is a phase 1 trial. But a lot of patients, when you look at polling data, you know, and questionnaires, a lot of patients are willing, you know, they're good people, right? Like at the end of the day, they want to help, even if it's not going to help them. They want to help future people who are going to be in this state. And so they're willing to go into these kind of phase 1 trials with the hope that it leads to something, right? Like knowing that it's probably not going to benefit them, but maybe down the road. And I, my impetus here was just that those people deserve to understand that that's what they're signing up for. And so that, like, again, there's parts of this that aren't really complicated. They're just not well known. So like one of the stats I throw into this book, right, is that there are, as of I think it was December of 2020, there were more clinical trials recruiting cancer patients than Burger Kings in the United States.
Yeah, I remember you saying that.
Right. Like there's a lot of them out there. And that, and then when people start to understand things, so like to dive into it a little bit, right? So like a phase 1. So the way I pitch it in the book is that each of the phases is asking a slightly different question. So the phase 1 trial is asking, is this thing is it safe? Right? So is this going to hurt anybody? So they're not even looking to see, not really, whether this is going to cure somebody's disease. They're looking for the right dose. So that they don't even know if they can give this to people yet, and what dose will be tolerated. And so, even from that, just knowing that, it opens up a whole can of worms if you're signing up for a phase 1, right? Because now the odds are you're going to get a dose that was either too low to be effective, right? Because I'm looking for the dose. So I'm going to start by giving, I'll give patient 1 a very, very, very low dose because I don't want to hurt anybody, but
Right.
like so low that I really don't think it's going to work, but I don't want to hurt anybody. So I'm going to give that one. And then if that goes okay, I'm going to give the next person a little bit more, and then the next person a little bit more after that, until I hit a point where somebody gets sick. Right. But the majority of patients in that, in that development are going to end up not being dosed correctly. Right. Even if the drug does get approved, you didn't get it at the right dose. And so, like it's those kind of things where I'm like, it's not a complicated idea, but if people knew that, I think then they would have a better understanding of what they're signing up for, and whether they want to participate or not, and what kind of questions they want to ask about their participation.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, let's move on from the depressing stuff. So you've self-published this through Amazon. How did that work?
So it was super easy, actually. I was hesitant at first, but from the date of deciding that I was going to finish this and sit down and publish it, so the day I had the manuscript done, to the first text I got that somebody had like a paperback copy in hand, was like a Monday to Friday transition, right? So like I submitted the manuscript on Monday, there was a paperback in my parents' hands by Friday, which is insane. I mean, if you really think about it, that's nuts. But it's really simple, and Amazon has a bunch of little 1-minute videos about how to do it. So they'll walk you through every step of the way. Basically, you just need to be, I'd say you need to be above average at Microsoft Word. Then you can take it from there. So that's it. And the Kindle was even easier. I mean, the Kindle version was very straightforward. That one, because the Kindle is a little different, right? Because it has reformatting and reflowable text. So you on your Kindle can view the book in whatever font or size you want. But in some ways, as an author, that makes it a lot easier because I don't have to decide how to lay it out. I'll let you do it.
Exactly. That makes sense for sure. It takes a little bit of a headache off your plate. So obviously they will take a cut for you selling it on their stuff, but is it for you, is it worth that? Like, is it a big cut, half, small cut? What, like?
Yeah. So on the Kindle copy, they take a 30% cut. And then on the paperback, they take, I don't remember what the percentage comes out to be. I mean, I think it's like 60. But part of that's the printing cost, right? So
of course,
the nice thing about Amazon is that they print on demand, right? So I don't have like 50 boxes of these things in my basement that I'm hoping to get rid of. They'll print as people order it.
I'm that way with these shirts. Please buy them.
Yeah, right. So that's a nice feature to it. And then they'll let you kind of play with the pricing, and then they also have advertising options. So I'm playing with those now. I tried for like a week using the Kindle lock screen. That was a complete flop. So now we're switching gears. Now it's a sponsored product campaign where it'll show up in people's searches as an Amazon sponsored product. Yeah, but they make it really easy.
I feel like the first time you try an advertisement with a big platform like that, it always flops. Like the first time I did one with like Instagram and one with Facebook, and I got like 2 subscribers out of it, and I was like, well, that was worthless.
Yeah,
but it's like, I don't like. They'll tell you this many people saw it. It's like you have no way of knowing if those people were like bots, or whatever. Yep. Especially for social media. But yeah, that makes sense. All right, well, you get a higher cut through the Kindle. So if anyone is thinking of buying it, buy it through the Kindle.
Well, to be fair, I priced them so I get the same cut either way.
Never mind. Buy whichever one you want.
Yeah, whichever one you want. But I will say the nice thing about the Amazon ads, if anybody's thinking of going that way, is I only pay Amazon if somebody clicks on the ad. So you don't pay per view, you pay per click.
That's nice.
Yeah. So at the very least, I only pay if somebody was interested enough to kind of check out the page.
Well, that's fair enough. I feel like that's a good system.
Yeah, right.
Can't guarantee a buy every time, but at least they clicked on it, and then maybe somebody else was interested, never know. Oh, that's awesome. If anybody's interested. I had Nolan Gilbert, he's a Wildland firefighter. I had him on the podcast, I think episode 31, maybe, if memory serves correctly. He also just self-published on Amazon a poetry book, collection of poetry.
That's right.
He came out last week or the week before. I think, Nolan, I'm throwing you under the bus. He's supposed to be coming back on the podcast relatively soon. So if you hear this and you haven't said yes yet, well, too bad. You're coming back now. But yeah, so yeah, no, it's super interesting. It's also really like I'm learning about all these things, and I feel like people who are unrelated to each other are doing them at the same time, which is really weird, but I guess life. Who knows?
Right. Yeah. Well, it's sort of nuts. I mean, right? What are we in at? 2022? Yeah. 2022 is insane, right? Like, I mean, if you told me 10 years ago that I could throw somebody a Word document and they'd kick out a book 4 days later, right? I would have told you you're crazy.
Yeah, that's nuts.
There's never been a better chance to leverage these things into something unique rather than trying to just 9 to 5 it all the time.
Yeah. So yeah, it's really nice. I think the remote working for some people obviously has been hard, but for people who have the drive to do extra stuff, it's been so helpful. I know for you to finish your book, for me, for even just to start the podcast and do the soccer stuff and all these things. Like, if this didn't happen, I never would have done most of this. And sometimes it's stressful because you got a lot more going on, but overall it's more worth it, in my opinion. It's like I'm learning so much from talking to all these people. It's like I didn't know that, using Nolan for instance, I didn't know that the federal wildland firefighters were called the hot shots, and then the people that jump out of planes are called the smoke shows or something, and every crew has their cool nickname. And I was like, damn, they should do that for other industries too.
Right? That's awesome.
I would never have known any of those things at all.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right. And you're building an audience. I mean, yeah, I'm telling the podcaster entrepreneur how great it is to dig out there.
I don't know, all 20 people that are listening to this is who knows.
You 20 people are my favorite.
Oh, well, you heard it here first. You can go buy Chris's book, all 20 of you.
Right. But it's cool, right? I mean, even the last winter I bought an Oculus VR headset, right? And recently it's been sort of so then Oculus got bought by Facebook, right?
Of course.
And they've been developing these multiplayer games where, I mean, it's everything, as a kid in the 90s, everything I ever wanted was to put on a headset and play with my friends. And now I'm kind of old and it's a little weird, but I can afford it. So take that.
Yeah, but no, of course.
I'm astounded by the fact that I can throw on this headset, and then some of my cousins who live out in Michigan I'm like seeing them in, not in real life, but like, like we're waving and like, it's cool. It's so
Yeah.
cool. The technology is insane. Like I really am enjoying how these things develop and watching. I have no idea how like the metaverse thing's going to turn out. No idea
Oh
I don't even
God.
really understand it,
Did you
but
did you see the initial ad for it? Where
I
it's like these
did.
like that creepy looking tiger with the penguin or whatever, and then these people are
Yeah.
just like look like they're on something. And they're just
Yep. Yep.
vibing to it. It's so
Uh-huh,
weird.
uh-huh. Mm, mm.
It's so
Yeah.
weird.
Well, and
I
do you
don't
see
know.
the other day the NBA let people watch from a VR room?
I did see that, and then they turned a LeBron dunk into an NFT, which is a
Yeah.
whole nother subject to get into. Somebody bought it as well. That's like things are, and then I think like the things are happening, and like I don't
Uh-huh.
think nobody really knows what they are.
Yeah.
But it's gonna be like probably an internet revolution part two
Hmm.
type deal. I don't know. The VR stuff is kind of like I don't know whether or not to resist it because it's creepy to me,
Yeah,
or
it's
to
fair.
like embrace it like, because everybody's going to be doing it. It's like a weird one for me because like people like there's no substitute for human to human interaction. Even
Hmm.
this, like I'd rather be in a room with you talking because it's easier to
Yeah.
kind of go back and forth, and like we've done this several times, so it's like a little bit easier for us. But like if you meet somebody for the first time, like I'd so much rather do this in person, but I don't have
Yeah.
like the funds of Alex Friedman to go fly out to some city, book a hotel room, and set up a whole studio in the hotel room for the day, or like
Not
Rogan to
yet.
fly people out to. Well, if that happens, that would be amazing. And you know what you guys have to do to make that happen is freaking subscribe, please. uh, but yeah, like it's just there's no substitute for that, and it's like it's cool. But if
Hmm.
people start living in those headset things, it's gonna be like I saw a
Yeah.
video of somebody like walking around their house and they ran into the wall because
Yep.
they didn't know where they were because they didn't set the bounds properly. It's like what like we don't even know what social media is doing to us. Like how like and then
Uh-huh.
we're giving our brains this VR thing where it's like we're existing but we're not. It's super weird to me. And I don't know.
Yeah.
I hope I'm not the only one that's like kind of creeped out by that.
No,
But
I've had a couple moments where, especially so, I have this thing where every October I play like a horror game. Like that's my one of
you
my traditions.
psychopath.
Yeah, pretty much. But this was the first year I did it in VR,
Oh God.
and that was terrifying. I played The Walking Dead,
Uh-huh.
which was great. But I remember I talked to my wife at one point, and I said, I lived through the video games cause violence like thing.
Yeah,
Like we
yeah.
did that in the 90s, and then like a bunch of data came out, and it like wasn't true. And like after playing that game for a while, I was like, we might need to revisit this discussion. Like it's a
I
little
just
different
mm-hmm.
in VR, right? Because you're moving and you're like your all of your sort of lizard brain things are getting triggered, right? You're hearing things behind you, you're watching something come at you, right? In full form, right? And now it's sort of like it's kind of blocky, but
Mm-hmm.
even like a blocky, not fully rendered
But even
thing,
that'll change like in 2 years. It'll be like
yeah,
HD.
right. Like so we're playing these games where I'm like, I don't know, like I've played games my whole life and never
Mm-hmm.
really been that amped up after playing anything.
No,
But
of
like I'll
course.
play something like that and like an hour later, I'm like, I have to like sit down and read a book for like half an hour to get my heart rate back down, because
Yeah.
I engaged in full on fight or flight mode,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
I feel like that's not good, especially for and you're a fairly stable person, not like just
yeah,
like emotionally, you're not
yeah.
so like up and down, you're fairly level.
Hmm.
So for you to have that reaction for me is kind of like well,
Yeah, I do. Either I'm becoming just an old man or there's something different here where I'm like, I'm concerned about this and kids and the ease of, I mean, it's the same issues but taken to a new level, right? Like how easy it
mm-hmm.
is to buy something and
Mm-hmm.
you buy your Farmville coins or whatever, your Roblox or
Mm-hmm.
and you suck kids into that, but add on to that a level of like getting accustomed to VR violence, and you've got a really nasty mix.
Yeah, I didn't even consider the violence thing. I just considered more like the people would just be more alone than they ever
Hmm.
had been before, like living off this, like, oh, I've got this friend in my VR headset. And it's like,
Uh-huh.
that's also not a great thing because then it's like, okay, well, there's so many potential spin-offs of problems. Like, okay, where does school go from here? Are we going to do school in VR? Like, and
Hmm.
if so, are you going to teach the teachers to teach in VR because they struggled enough with just PowerPoints and Zoom,
Right. Yeah.
which is no offense to any teachers, is not super complicated from a technology perspective. But
Hmm.
like, are we going to do that? And then what's that going to do to the kids? Are we just never going to see people in person again? Like, are we
Right.
just only going to watch sports games from VR? Like the NBA had their VR room. It's like you can't replace the atmosphere at a soccer game or like a hockey game, or like you can't replace that. If
Right.
everyone's just sitting there with the goggles on, I don't know. Maybe I sound like the old
Yeah.
person. I'm not even that old. Get
No, but
off
you're
my
right.
lawn.
Well, but like, a lot of the developments that come out are trying to integrate things that way, right? I mean, I've seen a number of ads about working in a VR space, and like I kind of
Nope.
go, "Oh, okay, whatever." But then then they came up with a Bluetooth link to your keyboard, right? And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, now all of a sudden in VR, I can see my real life keyboard. Okay,
Yeah.
now maybe there's something here I could do, like, or you can plot your couch in VR. So like you're mixing, now it's sort of more like an augmented reality thing.
Yeah. I don't
But
know.
yeah, it's gonna be odd.
The first thing that really creeped me out was Alexa. I was
Uh-huh.
like, yeah, no shot I'm getting that. And once I knew that existed, I was like, oh, we're going downhill fast because I knew like the sciencey people just like love discovering stuff.
Hmm.
And so it's kind of like the brakes have gone off the train and they're just going now. And there's not really much turning back, I think, at this point, which is
Yeah.
cool. Technology is amazing, but like, we don't know. Like, I think personally now, like when I was in high school, in middle school, I was annoyed that I didn't get a phone when I
Hmm.
was that age. But now I'm very grateful that my parents did not let me have that when I
Yeah.
was 12, 13, 14.
Hmm.
Because for a while it messed me up even when I was like 17, 18. Like, oh my god, they didn't respond to me. Do they not like me? Like these
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and growing up with that, like when you're 12, it's like, oh my god, like I couldn't
Yeah.
imagine doing that. And so then it's like we don't know what that's going to do to brains, and now we're twisting reality, which is like, that's not even hyperbolic anymore. It's like that's what it is. It's like, people, even like when they grow up, they're not even going to know like what's real, what's not. And
Yeah.
that's creepy to me. I don't really like that.
No, and I find with my phone, I don't know. Do you find this? So I find that people in sort of our age brackets are okay with phones. We're not really good at them. Like we're okay in terms of like trying to manage our behavior around them. But like
Mm-hmm.
the older generation, I feel like just got slammed with, I mean, effectively a new form of cigarettes, right? Like my
Mm-hmm.
parents will pull out their phone while we're sitting here have this conversation and like fiddle around on it, but like not like just check a quick text or like, oh, it buzzed, let me see what that is. Like they'll full on pull it out and start reading the news in the middle of a conversation, and you're like, if you
Yeah.
really sat there and thought about it for a second, right? Like if you and I were just sitting here and all of a sudden I was like, cool, what, like, I just start reading my book, you'd be like,
Nice plug
what's
with the
wrong with
book,
you?
dude.
Thank you. But right, like you'd be like, what's wrong with you? Like that's
Mhm.
super rude.
Yeah,
You know.
I had to really work on that when Jen and I were first dating, because I had like, there was all these group chats for soccer teams and like this and that, and people were always like doing this, and like I thought I was funny, so I would tweet something, and then like I'd be like, oh, nobody
Yep.
liked it, and I'd go check it, and Jen would be like, stop doing that. So I had to really work on that. I think I'm a lot better now than I was. Um, like, as horrible as this is to say, like I use my phone now to stay updated on, like, I'll listen to a podcast, but I'm not checking it.
Uh-huh.
So it's just on, but I'm doing other things. And so I do
Hmm.
that. And maybe that's not really good either, but like it's better than well, I don't know. But I don't feel the need to check it all the time now.
Yeah.
Like, I
No,
know
that's
if
good.
I'm supposed to get a text, it's tough because for the soccer training thing, if you have like a parent that like, hey, my
Yeah.
kid's sick today, like I gotta be like know where it is kind of.
Yeah.
So I've kind of had that balance, I think. But yeah, I had to work really hard to do that. I don't know.
Well, and do you find I find that it's almost a compulsion, right? Like I'm not enjoying it sometimes. Right? Like when I'm sitting there, like I'm really tired, I'm flipping through my phone, and then I like wake up and I'm like, I'm not even having fun with this. Like, why am I doing it? It's not.
It used to be like that more for me. Then I deleted Facebook and Twitter off my phone.
It's a good move.
And I have the tabs open in Safari, but it's when I go to check something about the way that they work in the browser versus the app. It's like the scrolling is not as concise. And so like it makes it more like it's a lot easier for me to be like, oh, that's stupid and get off. Like I don't spend like I used to spend like an insane amount of time on Twitter. It was horrible.
Yeah, you kind of naturally derail now.
It easily. Like sometimes I'll open it just like for like to check the podcast, and then I'll go to my personal one and I'll check it to see like soccer transfer news. And then as soon as I see somebody tweet like Joe Rogan took horse dewormer, I'm like, I'm out because it'll just piss me off.
Yeah. No, the comments are kind of fun to watch on those kind of things.
Yeah, sometimes I'll do that. But then when the first comment is like, Rogan is alt-right, I'm like, okay, no, I'm done. Like,
you're like, oh, okay.
Anything like that where I'm like, this is going to annoy me. I have an awareness now that is going to annoy me, and I turn it off instead of seeing to see if the person replied to that one and got him.
Right?
I used to do that.
Yeah.
And now
but you're right. Like it's not healthy, right? Like you're just annoyed at some random person on the internet who might be a bot. You don't even know.
It is. Also, speaking of bots, I heard this from Rogan's podcast, and I did some Googling. I don't know the exact numbers, but like the top like Facebook group pages, I think like 90% of the top big like Christian pages are run by like Russian troll farms out of Macedonia next to Greece. Like, so I bet I'm going to take two big bets right now. I'm going to bet that my mom is not going to watch this. And I'm going to bet that the Facebook groups that she's a part of are run by the Russians. So if she is listening, well, don't come yelling at me. Google it yourself. But yeah, like it's just like, because I love my mother, but sometimes she posts things where I'm like, why would you do that? Like, why would you engage with that material when I know you're going to be annoyed because my brother is texting me, don't come in yet, mom's annoyed at Facebook. Like
no, but right, it's true, right? Like, and so then if you were to ask her somehow in a not emotionally charged way, right? Like I said, it's the same thing we were saying about ourselves. Are you having fun? Like,
no.
Are you enjoying this? Like what are you doing? You're wasting your life doing something you hate.
Yeah. Well, the other side to that coin is you feel like some part of me feels like, I don't know, I'll go into this occasionally, like where I feel that people close to me, like I want to inform them of things that are going on in the world. And I feel that not necessarily that it's my responsibility, but somebody will say something like the Rittenhouse case was a really easy example. I did this I talked to a couple of people about this where so they would post something and I'd be like, that's just not true. Like it's not even an opinion. It's just untrue. I'd be like, hey, did you know that this and this happened? And it's like, as I'm texting this, I know that I'm going to put myself in a situation where I'm likely to get annoyed. But I feel that since it's my close friend, I should like do that. I don't know. So they're like, that's the flip side. Balance. And I feel like I'll say this and then mom will stop talking about you, but I feel like my mom is more on that side of the coin. But not that it makes it any better really, but
no, but I mean, tough. You could go the other way, right? Like it's the same sort of thing where you're going, I don't know why you're following. Why are you checking the COVID numbers every day?
Yeah.
It doesn't make you happy. It's not actionable information. You're being tied in, right?
Because you don't even know if it's true or not. That's the other thing as well. You don't even know. It's like, are they counting deaths of COVID, deaths with COVID, deaths
Right.
like you don't know what they're counting. And to her credit, my mom doesn't do that as much anymore, at least that I've seen. But also, I stopped going on Facebook, so I don't really know.
Yeah.
But like, you don't know if it's true or not, and it's so hard to verify because people will sneak words in, like, when people are talking about Rogan, I use Rogan as the example because it's just the easiest one. They'll put in like, and Russell Brand pointed this out with the headline. It was like controversial podcast host Rogan. They add controversial into the headline to make you your brain already go like, oh, he did something dumb. And then you read it and it's just like, oh, he did this, and this for COVID. And you're just like, why did you have to say that was controversial? Or like any sort of example, everything you read has that sort of charge, and that goes back to the VR set like thing where like nobody knows what's real anymore, and that's concerning because it's not just the VR stuff, it's what is actually happening in the world, because you're just getting fire hosed with information that you have no way of sifting through. It's like, I have no way of knowing any of this, and then people say, well, trust the experts, and it's like, well, the experts just lied to me, so like, I don't really know.
Right. Yeah, no, it's true. And I mean, it's an interesting discussion. So so especially like, so I have 2 kids, right? That, going on 3 potentially any moment.
And you're recording a podcast. What a guy.
Right? Yeah, I'll be down here all night on the couch, but for World XP, I make it happen.
Appreciate it.
But like when you're thinking about kids, right? I mean, I think about this a lot. Like, what do I teach them? How do I teach them to notice these things and to deal with it, right? Like, I don't think it's going away. I don't think there's any version where sort of this narrative driven reporting goes away, and so what do you teach them, right? Like, I mean, and the best I've come up with so far is to kind of put pretest probabilities on things and start to, I mean, my focus for, at least for the kids, has been to try and teach them to notice when their emotions are getting triggered and have that be a red flag, right? Like, that's what when you read something and it makes you angry, that should be a red flag, right? Of like, wait a second, slow down. Why do I feel this way? Right? Like, somebody is manipulating my lizard brain here. And, then to at least get the question of like, why? What are you trying to get out of me for this? And again, it's interesting because we would all agree. I mean, it's the used car lot sales tactic of pressure and waiting and, developing these threats and good cop, bad cop, like all of these sort of sales tactics are being employed. But they're doing it with a weird veneer that I think lets people let things slide. I saw somebody I don't remember. I feel bad not accrediting this to the right person, but somebody had pointed out that a lot of, I mean, even in the last 2 years, a lot of our decisions have not been science, they've been policy. And that's a different beast, right? Like, if we take it out of that charged arena and just go into like a car example.
Dr. Malone.
It might have been Dr. Malone. So like, but you take it to a car example, right? So my wife is, just about 9 months pregnant, right? So we're out walking down the street, and our car starts to act funny, right? And there happens to be a mechanic walking down the road, and she goes into labor, right? And I go to the mechanic and I say, what do I do? Like, can this car drive to the hospital? The question I've pitched to the mechanic is whether or not the car can drive, but they can answer it one of 2 ways, right? The car can or can't drive, or you should or shouldn't drive the car. But those are 2 different answers, right? One is making a risk assessment for me, and one is assessing the functionality of the car. So they might, and when you conflate the 2, you get into trouble, right? But it does give people a veneer to be like, well, the expert said that, and you're like, well, but the expert's not qualified to tell me how important it is that I get to the hospital right now, right? Like, they can tell me whether this car is going to function or not, but they can't tell me how important it is for me to roll the dice to get from A to B at this particular moment in my life.
Right.
But you can conflate those 2. And I think that's an interesting phenomenon going on now of being like, well, the expert said X, Y, or Z.
Yeah. Like, well, and that is not actually aimed at anyone in particular. It goes for all of these sort of things, even like different, like military people who have different thoughts on Afghanistan, this and that.
Sure.
It's like all sorts of things. It's not aimed at one particular thing before all
No.
all 20 of you get annoyed at me.
Well, it's the Jonathan Haidt thing, right? It's
Yeah.
it's freedom versus, it's, I don't remember all his splits, but it's a philosophical difference of, freedom versus respecting authority, or tradition versus innovation, right? Like there are philosophical issues, not that are manifesting as something else.
Yeah. And it's important I try to do that a lot when I ask questions of people who have an area of expertise that I need to make a decision in, but I don't have the information. I try and I'll phrase them as like information specific questions, so then I can make the decision. I try to avoid asking people what they think I should or shouldn't do, because it gets into, like we were talking about earlier, like with the doctor who doesn't know which clinical trial you should do. It's like, I try and phrase it in such a way, because people want to help you decide what to do often. And they're like, and they mean well. It's not like they're trying to trick you into doing it. They're like, oh, in my opinion, you should do this. And like, they want to offer their opinion, and that's totally fine. But I try and make sure that I ask it in like, okay, what will happen if I do this? And what will happen if I do that? That's it.
Right.
Don't tell me which one you would rather do. And it's manifesting itself for me with this injury that I have. It's like, what will happen if I play, and what will happen if I don't play? And occasionally people will be like, oh, you should or shouldn't play. And sometimes I'll listen, but oftentimes I know what I'm feeling better than that guy that told me that I should or shouldn't play. And so that's how I phrase it. It's like, okay, I'm feeling this pain. What does this mean? Feeling that pain. What does that mean? How far can I push this? Basically, is like, okay. And so today they're like, well, if the pain goes to a 4, it's probably a bad sign. It's like, okay, that's the information I needed. Then maybe do I rest tomorrow? Like, I will make that decision then afterwards. Right. And so it's difficult because you kind of got to back yourself, and be confident in your own decision. And that's a whole different situation to deal with as well. Because I know in some situations I'm not confident in that decision, and I would like somebody to tell me what to do. So it's like, it's a two-side. Everything is like a whirlwind of if this, then that never ends.
Well, and part of that too, I think, so part of that is something I discussed in the book too with patients, right? Is that there's this thing, to the best of my knowledge, this probably has another name, but I call it unintentional doublespeak. And it's a scenario where you and I are using the same word, but we're applying 2 different meanings to it, right? And we slide past each other without anybody noticing, right? So like, like in your example, right, it would be me, instead of saying if the pain's a 4, it would be, well, if the pain's kind of moderate, then maybe go forward, right? So in your head, you're like, well, I'm super tough, right? So
pain tolerance as well, it leads to different things.
Right. And like, and so my advice gets kind of filtered through your perception. And again, like, it's something patients run into a lot too, with like interacting with their doctor, where they say, I think you're going to do well on this therapy. Right. And then you go, well, if you take a step back and go, you ask them later, what does the doctor say? Oh, they think I'll do well. And you go, well,
like,
what does that
mean? Yeah.
Yeah. And it could go a lot of ways, right? Like, does that mean you'll live a long time? Does it mean your disease will be static? Does it mean you'll be cured? Does it mean the side effects won't be too bad? Like, there's a whole list of clarifying questions that need to be kind of addressed. And like you said, it's a weird spot where you sort of have to be your own advocate of like, well, and attempt to extract values, judgments from raw information. Right.
That one's tough too, because somebody can give you a whole spiel about something. You have to like pick and choose which one is relevant, what's not relevant, what is their opinion, what is the fact, like all sorts of things. And like Jordan Peterson always says all the time, he's like, well, that's complicated. It's like, you don't realize, like, we've spent like 4 minutes on this topic in particular, and we've gotten nowhere other than maybe laying out the ground rules to potentially discuss a solution.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of human kind of existence. And every decision you make, if you really boil it down, you can go through this thought exercise with almost every single decision you make. We don't think about it because like a lot of them are simple decisions. Like, all right, I'm making eggs this morning. Do I want 2 or 3 eggs? And just like, all right, screw it. I'll just put the third one in there. Like we don't think about it, but you can do this thought experiment with almost every single decision you make. And then that gets weird because then you get wrapped into the loophole where you don't actually do anything, and which is also unproductive.
Yep.
So it's complicated. Yes, thank you, Dr. Pearson. It's very complicated. I think one of the funniest things he ever said was like, he was on, you know who Andrew Schulz is?
No.
He's a comedian who has this podcast called Flagrant 2. Jordan Peterson went on his podcast, and Andrew Schulz was basically like, oh, I'm not important. Like, I just make dick jokes. And Peterson was like, well, that's important because of like this, like all these things, because he understood, like, I don't know. It's complicated.
The guy's he's a deep thinker, right? Like, I mean, he's a unique figure. I feel like in that he's a deep thinker, but also he's pretty good about crystallizing his thoughts in a way that's approachable. Like there's deep thinkers where you're like, whatever you said was very profound. I have no idea what it was, but it's, you know. And then there's other ones where you're like, oh yeah, like I mean, this is my thing with Thomas Sowell, right? Where I'm like, you're really smart, and also when I read what you've written, you're crystal clear in your meaning. Which is rare.
Yeah. Well, it takes another level of intelligence to be able to articulate those thoughts into, like, was it Albert Einstein? It was like, if you can't explain it to a 5th grader, then you don't actually understand it.
Yes.
It's like, that's a thing as well. Like to have such a deep grasp of whatever you're talking about, to be able to articulate those thoughts into something that somebody that has no idea what you're talking about can understand. Is another gift in it, like in itself.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's weird. And then the other phenomenon with that is like when you go through these thought exercises, like you can tell that something is good happening. Like we're both going to leave this. Well, I am anyways, with like a good feeling. Like I learned something today. Yeah. Which is important for that human to human interaction that we were talking about earlier. It's like you need that. It's like you can't just get that from putting a headset on and like waving at you're like, oh, that's cool, but then like after that, that's it. I guess there's something more profound going on. Yeah.
Well, and I enjoy the you know, camaraderie of intellectual exploration, right? I mean, it's not what, there's a time and place, right? I enjoy my video games where I'm whatever,
of course,
you know, but it's not, like you said, it's not the same thing. It's not attempting to think out, you know, like think into sort of deeper thoughts and dive into more, you know, more values and philosophy and sort of understanding how things go, you know, like trying to really kind of consciously dig into these topics as opposed to just sort of go to your, you know, your set of sound bite responses to stuff, which, you know, everybody has, of like, oh, okay, whatever, you know.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons why I stay off social media now. It's because like all the conversations, when you boil them down, it's the same. Like it's like insert issue, insert left, insert right, and then and like that's the entire conversation, just back and forth over and over and over again. And it's dumb to me now, which is why I don't bother looking at it.
Matt, there's a great quote from Matt Taibbi where he says, like, it doesn't make any sense that I can, but like this is how it works, which is if I know your position on like random topic S, I can guess it on another one, but they're total, like they don't make sense. Like there's no rhyme or reason that your position on abortion should match to your position on, I don't know,
foreign
policy or something, right? Like your feelings on Israel and abortion. Like why is this link here? It doesn't make sense, right?
It doesn't.
Like, but it, you know, it's given to you as a set of ideas, but they're not really linked when you dig into them.
Yeah, and that's one of the another one of the reasons why I stayed off, because like why I'm staying off is because I would clash with everyone, because I don't have the, if you guess my position A, then you know my position Z because I compartmentalize each thing and I think
Mhm.
about each thing in its own way, and I try to like make sure I fully understand an issue on it. And if I don't
Mhm.
understand an issue, I'll say I don't know enough, I don't have an opinion yet, and that also annoys people because they think that you should have an opinion. It's
Yeah.
like I'm in like this whole weird world, so I'm just like
Yeah.
kind of like fucked off from it, from social media. Like
But
I
it's a
don't
better
know.
place to be.
Yeah,
It's better, you know?
but it's also not in some ways because then I get stuck in my own thoughts, and that's sometimes also not fun because I end up in
Yeah,
those
it's true.
thought exercise loopholes where I'm like, "There's no end," and then I just turn on FIFA and I just turn on FIFA and run away from my thoughts.
There you
That's
go.
maybe not helpful either, but yeah, who knows?
That's a future use
Oh,
problem.
yeah. Well, future me is gonna have a lot of problems with VR. That's for sure.
Fair. Fair.
But speaking of shoals and comedy, one of the other things I wanted to run by you, this also goes with the human nature problem, is I've been on this binge. Um, I know you know what Kill Tony is now because we talked beforehand about it. But basically, for
Mhm.
those listening that don't know what it is, Tony Hinchcliffe is this comedian. Him and Brian Redband, another comedian, they host a show weekly where they get set up in a theater or comedy club, and they've got their table and the band behind them, and then people go basically put their name in a hat, and if they get picked, they get to do a minute of stand up uninterrupted, and then they talk with Tony and Brian and whoever the guest is. They've had like Mark Norman, Shane Gillis, Rogan's been a guest on there. Um, who else? Like tons of people have been guests on there, like famous comedians, and is really interesting to me because, and they also have their like regulars, so that like they'll have like two or three guys go every single week because they've
Mhm.
kind of like proven they've graduated from being open micers into like they're kind of doing this as their thing, that like they're right on the cusp of like they don't have a lot of money but they're making enough to where like they don't necessarily need another job. They're like right on the
Yeah.
bubble. So like one guy's living out of his van, but he's like, I don't know. He's a weird guy. But a lot of these people that I've noticed are super weird and like have like if you met them, like it makes sense for a comedy scene. But if you met them like at the grocery store, you'd be like, "What the hell are you doing with your life?" And so what I was thinking about is like, are these people aware? Like, some people have self awareness, other people don't. Like, are
Mhm.
these people? Do they think they're gonna go kill for a minute with these famous comedians like behind them, or do like they think they're gonna bomb and they know they're gonna bomb, or do they actually want to try, or like if they have some weird quirk, like do they know, like are people laughing at them or with them? It's this whole weird like sort of, as Jordan Peterson would call it, it's like on the periphery of like human, like the artists are like on the periphery of like human sort of
Yeah.
consciousness, because it's like they live in this weird world where they push the boundaries of things that are socially acceptable and aren't. But I don't know. It's very strange to me. So the example I use is there one of the regulars who was a regular. He had Lou Gehrig's disease. And he'd go on every week, and he would slay. Dude was hilarious. But it was like some of his jokes, I was like, are we laughing at him or with him? Like there was one time one of his jokes was he was mad at deaf people at the Paralympics because they got all the because they got all the special needs pussy was the joke. And I was I was like, well, so this is funny because this guy made the joke, but like, are we laughing because you had to speed up the video times two to understand what he was saying? Like, what is going on here? Like, I can't figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. I in that kind of scenario, like I don't, my impulse is to laugh because it's funny. But then there's another part of me going, probably shouldn't laugh at that. Like,
Yeah.
and I, and then like you said, for the entertainer, do they, I mean, I do think, you know, kind of listening to some interviews with comedians, a lot of them know that they're in that space and they're okay with it.
The famous ones do, like the famous ones do, but like the people that are doing this, like these open mic
Yeah.
1 minute sets, like, do they know? It's like, I feel like some of them don't know.
Right. 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 And I don't know how you know, how do you thread that needle of being like, of being the joke and also attempting to gain sort of respect and develop a career out of being the joke? Like, is there a balancing act there between? Yeah, it's a very interesting. Comedians are very interesting people. Like I don't.
There's
Yeah,
definitely you have to balance it, because like you and I, if we're gonna watch something and some guy just runs on stage and he says like, I'm depressed, it's like, all right, that's not funny. But if some
right.
other guy like sets it up in a little bit of a nicer way, like, we'll laugh.
Yeah,
And that's a very weird thing, because what they're saying when you're talking about taking tidbits of information, like picking out what's fact and what's not, both of those boil down to the comedian says they're depressed.
right.
But there's a
Right.
way, but like, so there's a way that one says it where it's like, that's funny, but it's not just the way that they say it, it's everything about them. It's like the tone of voice, the cadence, the delivery, what they look like, all of these things go into it. And it's just it's like very strange for me, because somebody will say like, okay, this guy made this joke and it was funny, I'm gonna make a similar joke. Like, obviously it's against like code or whatever to steal jokes, but like, this sort of subject material can be funny, I'm gonna try to do that, and then they bomb, and it's like,
Right.
then what?
Right. Like, and did they intentionally, like, is the bombing part of the joke?
Yeah, for some of the open micers it might be, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we sort of touched on this earlier, where there's a personality type that's willing to like go for it, but it's uncomfortable, right? So I do think there's a level of sort of filter for somebody who will just get out there and go, yeah, sure, I'll talk on the stage. Like, there's a lot of people will just go, no, I'm not doing that. That's it's not.
No, it's weird, and I wouldn't do it either. I'm pseudo doing it now, and that was a big thing for me to like get it. It's like, okay, I have these opinions, well, like, they're not perfect, but I'm gonna put them out there on the internet, but I don't have to like deal with the rejection of like, there's 100 people that think that I am not funny at all.
Yeah,
it's like, that is hard
to
deal with.
Yeah, and like you said, you're doing it face to face, right? Like, they're expressing that they don't think you're funny in real time. Like,
it's like, then it's like, what do you do with that? It's like, so the ones that are self-aware, does that like shatter their world view, or does it not, because they know that bombing is a part of going up through the ranks? And then the same question for the ones that aren't self-aware, it's like, did they think they were funny and they're delusional, and now this shatters their worldview because they're not actually funny? And then what, it's just very, like, obviously we're not going to get through all this, but it's just very odd. It's like, this space is very odd, but I enjoy it immensely.
Well, it's complicated.
Yeah, I don't know.
But it's I do find comedians fascinating, because they have a unique mixture of, like you said, sort of internalized depression, and also an extroverted nature in the sense of wanting to share it with the world. But and then there's the third aspect, which is the world kind of wants to hear about it.
Yeah.
Right. Like, we all have those friends who are like, okay, here goes so and so. Here's Eeyore complaining again.
Yeah.
And they're not funny, and you kind of wish they'd go away.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you had a comedian friend, like you said, it would be they somehow touch on an aspect of everyday life that, in, like you said, in a way that frames things up, but also, I think, kind of, yeah, I don't know. It's a weird mix. There's this great Bill Burr bit that I think of a lot as a parent, which is, he says something like, it's never the big things that make me want to or consider suicide, right? Like, it's not like the big life-changing things. It's the little things, right? Like, it's that that all of a sudden my coffee spilled on my car, and I go, if I just yank this wheel to the right, I could just end it right now. Yeah. and I'm like, the funny thing is, he's right. Like, it's, at least in my head, I'm like, it's never the big things, like, because I'm never seriously contemplating it. No, but there's an aspect of me when like something goes wrong where I'm like,
something
just
so
end it,
minute and inconvenient.
Right. Like, somehow they've cued into that aspect of psychology where I'm like, it's totally irrational. It doesn't make sense. But yeah, no, he's right. I do think that, where I'm like, I stub my toe and I'm like, that's it. I'll just step out into traffic. It's enough.
Yeah. And for him specifically, the delivery, the Boston accent makes it all better. Like, it just makes it work.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
his vibe. That's his thing, like being kind of angry. Or the same thing with, like, they touch on these, like, everybody's thinking it, but nobody says it type thing. Like, another Bill Burr bit is like, he's like, you're telling me there's no reason to hit a woman, not one. And then he goes through this whole spiel of, like, I forgot exactly what it was, but like when he says it, the crowd is kind of like, oh, but then they're all laughing. It's like, it's like, you shouldn't do that.
Right.
And people say there's no reason to do it, but also, LOL. It's so weird. It's so weird.
In an interesting way, I mean, I like following comedians because I think they kind of, in some ways, they cut through what we were talking about earlier. But like, they've somehow managed to land on the magic formula of being like, what you think is ridiculous, right? And then in the back of your head, you're like, oh yeah, no, he's right. It is ridiculous. Right? Like, I mean, there's always people who can't take a joke, but I feel like a lot of people are like, oh yeah, no, okay, you're right. That's these shouldn't be connected, but they are.
Yeah, they do such a good job with it as well, and that's one of the things where, like the open micers struggle with that art form a little bit, because the first couple times listening to it, I was like, skipped through some of the really bad ones because I was like, oh, I don't want to deal with the uncomfortable situation. But then I was like, no, I'm going to make myself do it as like a exercise and see what goes on. And some of them had like good premises to the jokes. Yeah. But the delivery was off, or like something was just off and nobody laughed. But I was like, yeah, that wasn't funny. But also, if he had done maybe this with it, that could have been funny. Like, I could see how this could be funny.
Yeah.
In a later one. And that's a weird one as well, because they've got the really good ones, like the really good joke writers have this way of sifting through, like, that word didn't work there, but this one will. And they have to do a lot of that working out at comedy clubs, which is why I've been like, it's been kind of recently, I've been on like, oh, I need to go to one just to see what goes on. And then the other part of it is like, why do I do this with everything? Need to know how everything works instead of just enjoying it. And that's another weird thing, rabbit hole to go down. But yeah, I don't know, because I saw Mark Norman, he posted, some of them are posting more of the working out. So Mark Norman was in New Jersey working some stuff out, and you saw him with the notepad up there, and he would post like the build up and then just not the punchline, because he doesn't want people, like, his jokes to be out there before a special or whatever.
Sure.
But like, they're willing to share that, and that's really cool because they show themselves bombing on jokes and then how they recover from it, like how they deal with hecklers. And then if you've ever seen like a compilation of like comedian roasts heckler, it's like there's just something different in their brain, like with Andrew Schulz. Like, Andrew Schulz released a special that was 30 minutes of crowd work. It's like, and it was good. That's the thing. It's like, their brains just are wired different.
Yeah. I wonder if that kind of ties into what you said earlier, though, where it's, if your brain is working a little bit outside the normal bounds, so much so that it's unclear whether you know that bombing is part of the process or knew that you were going to bomb, right? Like, if your senses aren't clued in, does that give you an interesting out of the box perspective, right? Like, because you're not in the box with the rest of us. The rest of us knew you were going to bomb, but you can now see things that we wouldn't see because we're in the box and you're outside it.
Yeah. I don't know. That actually happened on one of the episodes of Kill Tony. This guy went up. It was his first time ever doing comedy, and his parents were there. So Tony brought the parents on stage, and he was like, something tells me that you guys think that you have a better 60 seconds than your son. Like, between the two of you could put together a better set than your kid. And so he brings him up on stage, and he brings his dad the mic, and his dad, the first joke, he was like, we always knew he was a little bit odd, and he killed. The whole crowd went nuts. And it's like, that's not really that's a different situation of being funny, because he was able to play off the other
Yes.
guy rather than write the joke. And like,
Yes.
I feel like I can play off other things and be funny from time to time, but like, I don't think I can't write a joke out,
Yeah.
and like, I don't have the guts to go on stage and do it. Which is
Right.
another weird thing. But it's another weird thing to when once you get past the writing the joke stuff, then you are able to just go do crowd work because people know who you are. And
Yeah.
then once you, it's like you bounce off people, is like easier to do stuff. So like when the famous guys are roasting the newcomers, it's like super easy. It's like, LOL, that's funny.
Yeah.
Like, but like that one was a layup. It's like, oh, I don't know. Yeah. So then he had what did the dad? I forgot what it was. Oh yeah. So then after the dad goes like, yeah, I thought he was gonna bomb, but he didn't do too bad. Like, he had one funny joke, but it was like, everybody knows that they're gonna bomb, but they don't know, or they do, and
Yeah.
they do it anyways, which is also kind of scary.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is part of the process, right? I'm of anything, right? You kind of go in. I think there's only so much planning you can do, and at some point you got to jump in, and it's going to be ugly the first time. You just, you try to get better at it. But I do think a lot of people are afraid, like they're afraid of the mistakes they'll make. I mean, I'm afraid of them. I know I feel it when I jump out there, and
Oh,
you
of
know,
course.
but on the other hand, you got to be like, well, it's either that or just be in the background
Yeah.
forever.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not necessarily afraid of making mistakes, but I am afraid of making mistakes in front of 150 people.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
Publicly, and then it'll go on YouTube as, this guy bombed, and then you're famous for being bad. It's like, that's
Right.
not fun either.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, we went on in the office the other day. We went on like a binge of YouTube videos. I mean, that were like basically fail compilations, right? Like it was the grape stomping lady. You remember that, right? Like, I mean, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
This lady's famous for falling out of stomping grapes and sounding like a seal, because it's clear she'd never had the wind knocked out of her before. And
Yeah.
in her case, the first time it ever happened was on live TV. But yeah. So I'm afraid of those things happening, but you just go out there and give it a shot, I suppose. I give those people a lot of credit, but I do also laugh at their misery.
Of course. I think they also do that as well, which is,
yeah.
I don't know, makes me appreciate the good ones a little bit more, I think.
I like watching the process. Like I enjoy people who let us into that, to seeing it develop.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of like, I like the finished product, right? I love a good Netflix special.
Yeah.
But I like watching things kind of come together too.
Yeah. Makes me appreciate watching comedians appreciate other comedians, because they'll like work stuff out on like together, like, oh, that's a good bit, and then like kind of, like you'll hear about that in the next special. Like there's been a couple of moments where I'm like, yeah, that'll probably be in this guy's next special, this guy that just bombed. And it's like, you can see him like in his brain, like, ooh, there's something there.
Well, and it's funny to watch. Like you said, I like being able to see the development over time too, of like watching somebody kind of tweak some things, and you see some things fail, and then they come back together. Like I've been watching. Have you heard anything about Choo Choo Charles? It's a game in development about a train that also is maybe part spider and tries to attack you while you drive around on your train. It sounds crazy. It is crazy.
Yeah.
But the thing that is interesting about it is the guy who's developing it has developed this sort of strange cult following, because he keeps posting these developer videos. So he's a single guy developing this game where he was like, what if I made a game about a spider train that attracts you? And like, he kind of ran with it. But everything he posts on YouTube is more about the development of the game and bugs he's run into. And like, he's packaging it into this sort of behind the scenes development where like, there's no way this game is going to be great, but watching it be built and like watching him work through the bugs, and the bugs are always pretty amusing, like the enemies start flying off the map and it's kind of crazy to watch. But like watching somebody work through the process is weirdly interesting.
Yeah.
So like I subscribe just to watch him program the game about the spider train. Like,
yeah, that's wild. I've watched Tommy do that. Tommy, for those of you that, well, he was my roommate in college. He's a software guy. He's also making his own game. So I've watched him do similar things. And like the other day I was down there, down at his apartment, and we were going over basically like this probability math code, because what happens is like it's not necessarily a maze game, but the computer, like the AI or the game will basically spawn walls.
Sure.
And he was trying to get it so it would be random, but it would like make sense. And what had happened was when he clicked go, they just went like all on top of each other, and it looked ridiculous. So yeah, I've watched him do the same as well. And then Kevin was on episode 20, also as a video game developer. So yeah, that world is that's another weird world there. The software guys are
right. That's true. It's a lot, like another interesting bunch just to see how your brain works.
Yeah, I tried a little bit of it in college, and the patience to like comb through code to find that one extra period that broke the whole thing, I was like, yeah, no, I'm out.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, I mean, the code starts to do weird things on its own. You're like, I never intended you to, like, and then you dig into it, you're like, oh, okay, I see how the logic tree led me here.
Yeah.
But you've got to, like, you're always creatively coming up with a new solution to a problem that you made. So it's an interesting thing to like. I like watching the iterations of it.
Yeah.
I have no interest in doing it, but I enjoy watching
whatsoever.
people. I enjoy the solutions people come up with. Like one of the ones on this last development episode, he realized that one of the NPC arms he'd made were too short. And so the person was sitting on a chair and their arms were just sort of floating in midair because the arms were too short. And so he was like, I mean, I could try to fix the model, but instead I just gave her a pet rock. So now there's a rock sitting on her, like so that her arms are sitting on the rock, and now it makes sense. But like, it's all that kind of like inside baseball of, well, I could fix the code, but instead I just put a rock there and now it looks okay.
Yeah. Efficiency of time. Oh my gosh, that's wild. Well, speaking of solutions, we have offered a lot of problems tonight with no solutions. So no, none whatsoever. We've been talking for almost 2 hours, 10:30. Wife is about to give birth. I'll let you go. It's gonna be the last night that you could maybe sleep for like 3 months.
True.
So I'll plug mine, then you plug yours. Get your shirts, World XP Soccer on Instagram. DM us. I've still got a bunch. Please buy them. Chris, your book is out on Amazon. It's called, what's it called again?
What the heck is a clinical trial, and where do I find one?
There you go. Link will be in the description. Go buy it. Even if you don't want it, buy it anyways.
And review it, please. Because right now it's creepy. There's no reviews. It's creepy.
Oh,
nobody will buy it.
Well, yeah, put a review on Amazon. You don't even have to buy it. Just say it's good. Something, anything. That's the thing with these like online stuff. Anything helps. Like a subscription, a review, anything helps gain more traction with the algorithm that no one actually knows how it works. But
exactly.
All right. This has been a great discussion. I appreciate your time.
Always a pleasure.
Any last nickels?
No, I think we covered it all.
All right, let's get out of here. All right, we'll talk to you guys later. Peace.